What if one man could change the course of history without ever leading an army? For nearly a decade, the world's most powerful intelligence agencies searched for a single shadow. They crossed deserts, tracked whispers, and followed clues that seemed to disappear overnight. His name became one of the most recognized and feared in modern history. But here's the question that still fascinates millions of people today. How did the son of a billionaire construction family become the world's most wanted terrorist? The answer isn't as simple as most people think. It begins decades before the headlines, in a country undergoing dramatic change, where a quiet young man was growing up in extraordinary privilege, with no sign that his life would one day reshape global politics forever. This isn't just the story of Osama bin Laden. It's the story of the decisions, conflicts, and historical events that transformed the world we live in today. Before the world knew his name, Osama bin Laden was simply one of dozens of children born into one of Saudi Arabia's wealthiest and most influential families. He entered the world in 1957, in Riyadh, during a time when Saudi Arabia itself was rapidly changing. Oil wealth was transforming the country's economy, new roads and cities were being built, and the bin Laden family was helping shape much of that development through one of the kingdom's largest construction companies. From the outside, his future seemed almost guaranteed. He had access to privilege, financial security, and opportunities that millions could only dream about. Few people would have guessed that someone raised in such comfort would eventually become one of the most hunted individuals in history. But history has a way of taking unexpected turns. Behind the wealth and influence, the Middle East was entering a period of enormous political and religious change. The Cold War was reshaping global alliances. Revolutions were changing governments. Armed conflicts were leaving deep scars across the region. These events would influence an entire generation. And Osama bin Laden was growing up in the middle of it. As a young man, he was known by classmates as quiet, deeply religious, and disciplined. Friends from that period described someone who appeared reserved rather than charismatic. At that point, there was little to suggest he would one day command worldwide attention. Then came the event that would change everything. In December 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. What began as a regional conflict quickly became one of the defining battlegrounds of the Cold War. Governments around the world became involved directly or indirectly, while thousands of volunteers from different countries traveled to Afghanistan, believing they were joining a larger cause. Among those volunteers was Osama bin Laden. At first, his role was not that of a battlefield commander. Instead, he used his family's wealth, business connections, and organizational skills to help finance projects, build infrastructure, and support foreign volunteers arriving in the region. Those experiences introduced him to influential militant figures and allowed him to build relationships that would shape the next chapter of his life. Looking back, many historians point to this period as the turning point. Without the Afghan War, the course of his life, and perhaps even parts of modern history, might have unfolded very differently. But the war would eventually end. And when it did, the network of fighters, financiers, and ideologues built during those years would not disappear. Instead, it would evolve into something far larger, far more organized, and far more dangerous than almost anyone imagined. When the Soviet-Afghan War came to an end, many people believed the fighting was finally over. They were wrong. The battlefield was changing. But the people, the money, and the connections built during the war remained. Thousands of foreign volunteers returned to their home countries carrying years of combat experience. Others stayed in the region, uncertain about what came next. Governments shifted their attention elsewhere, believing the conflict had reached its conclusion. But for Osama bin Laden, the end of one war wasn't the end of the mission. It was the beginning of something new. Instead of focusing on a single battlefield, he began thinking about a permanent organization, one that could preserve the relationships formed during the Afghan conflict. That idea would eventually become known as al-Qaeda, a name commonly translated as the base. The organization did not appear overnight. It developed gradually through meetings, personal relationships, financial support networks, and years of cooperation among people who had fought together. In the late 1980s, bin Laden and several close associates discussed creating a structure that could maintain contact with experienced fighters after the war. Their goal was to keep the network connected instead of allowing it to dissolve once everyone returned home. At first, the group remained relatively small. Few people outside intelligence circles had ever heard its name. There were no worldwide headlines. No major television coverage. No one imagined that this quiet organization would eventually dominate global news. During this period, Osama bin Laden was becoming more than a financial supporter. He was emerging as a central figure within the network. His wealth, international contacts, and reputation from the Afghan War gave him influence among many who had participated in the conflict. But another event was about to change his worldview even further. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. The crisis triggered an international military response led by the United States. Saudi Arabia, concerned about its own security, allowed American and coalition forces to deploy inside the kingdom. For many governments, this was viewed as a strategic military decision. For bin Laden, it became a turning point. He strongly opposed the presence of foreign troops in Saudi Arabia, home to Islam's two holiest cities. His criticism of the Saudi government grew louder, creating increasing tension with the country's leadership. Those disagreements would eventually force him to leave Saudi Arabia. His relationship with the government deteriorated rapidly. Eventually, his Saudi citizenship was revoked. Without a country to return to, bin Laden relocated to Sudan during the early 1990s. There, he invested in businesses, construction projects, and agriculture while continuing to strengthen the network that had begun after the Afghan War. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies from multiple countries were becoming increasingly concerned. The organization was expanding. Its finances were growing more complex. Its members were spreading across different regions. Yet much of its activity remained hidden from public view. Most Americans had never heard the name al-Qaeda. That would soon change. By the mid-1990s, mounting international pressure forced Sudan to expel Osama bin Laden. He returned to Afghanistan, where the Taliban had gained control over much of the country. From there, al-Qaeda entered a new phase. Training camps expanded. The organization attracted recruits from multiple countries. Its leadership became more structured. And intelligence agencies around the world began issuing increasingly urgent warnings. Still, very few people understood what was coming. Within just a few years, a coordinated series of attacks would bring al-Qaeda to the attention of the entire world. And on one clear September morning, everything would change forever. By the late 1990s, al-Qaeda was no longer an obscure organization known only to intelligence agencies. It had become a growing international security concern. U.S. investigators had already linked the group to several major terrorist attacks, including the 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Those attacks killed more than 200 people and injured thousands, bringing al-Qaeda into the global spotlight for the first time. Then, in October 2000, another devastating attack followed. The USS Cole, a U.S. Navy destroyer, was refueling in Yemen when a small boat packed with explosives struck its side. 17 American sailors were killed. Dozens more were injured. The attack reinforced a troubling reality. This wasn't a single isolated group carrying out random acts of violence. It was an organization capable of planning complex operations across international borders. Inside U.S. intelligence agencies, concern continued to grow. Analysts were collecting fragments of information. Intercepted communications. Travel records. Financial transactions. Reports from foreign intelligence partners. Each clue seemed important. But none revealed the full picture. It was like trying to solve a 1,000-piece puzzle with half the pieces missing. Meanwhile, inside Afghanistan, al-Qaeda leaders were preparing for an operation unlike anything the world had ever seen. The planning reportedly stretched over several years. According to investigations conducted after the attacks, the operation involved extensive coordination, international travel, financial support, and strict operational secrecy. The participants trained patiently. Many lived ordinary public lives while hiding their true intentions. To neighbors and classmates, they often appeared completely normal. That ordinary appearance became one of the most disturbing lessons investigators would later uncover. As the summer of 2001 approached, warning signs continued to appear. Several intelligence reports suggested that al-Qaeda intended to strike American interests. Officials recognized the threat. What they did not know was when, where, or exactly how the attack would happen. Then, Tuesday arrived. September 11, 2001. It began like any other morning. Millions of Americans left for work. Children headed to school. Airports were crowded with travelers. No one imagined that within hours, the country would experience one of the darkest days in its history. At 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time, a hijacked commercial airliner crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. At first, many people believed it was a terrible accident. Television cameras focused on the burning skyscraper. Reporters searched for answers. Then, just 17 minutes later, a second hijacked airplane struck the South Tower. In that instant, the uncertainty disappeared. America was under attack. As confusion spread across the country, more reports arrived. Another hijacked aircraft crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. A fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back against the hijackers. Investigators later concluded that the passengers' actions prevented the aircraft from reaching its intended target. The attacks unfolded in less than 2 hours. Yet their impact would be felt for generations. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives. Victims came from more than 90 countries. Firefighters, police officers, office workers, flight crews, passengers, parents, children, friends. Lives changed forever in a single morning. Within hours, investigators began the largest criminal and intelligence investigation in U.S. history. Evidence collected from the attack sites, airline records, financial transactions, surveillance footage, and international intelligence cooperation quickly pointed toward al-Qaeda. Soon afterward, Osama bin Laden became the primary focus of one of the most extensive manhunts ever launched. But finding him would prove far more difficult than anyone expected. He had already disappeared into one of the most challenging landscapes on Earth: the mountains of Afghanistan. And the search that followed would last nearly a decade. By the evening of September 11, 2001, the United States had entered a new era. For millions of Americans, the attacks didn't just destroy buildings. They shattered a sense of security that had existed for generations. People were asking the same question. Inside the White House, the Pentagon, and intelligence headquarters, emergency meetings continued around the clock. The FBI launched the largest criminal investigation in its history. The CIA shifted nearly every available resource toward identifying everyone connected to the attacks. For the first time, dozens of intelligence agencies around the world began sharing information at an unprecedented level. Within weeks, investigators concluded that the attacks had been planned by al-Qaeda. Attention quickly turned to Afghanistan. At the time, much of the country was controlled by the Taliban, who had allowed Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda to operate from Afghan territory. The United States demanded that the Taliban hand him over. The Taliban refused. Diplomacy had reached its limit. On October 7, 2001, less than 1 month after the attacks, the United States, together with allied forces, launched military operations in Afghanistan. The objective was clear: disrupt al-Qaeda, remove the Taliban government that was providing it sanctuary, and capture or kill Osama bin Laden. The opening campaign moved faster than many expected. Coalition airstrikes targeted military positions, training camps, and communication networks. On the ground, U.S. Special Operations Forces worked alongside Afghan partners who were already fighting against the Taliban. Within weeks, major cities began changing hands. The Taliban government started collapsing. To many observers, it looked like the war might end quickly. But the mission's most important target was still missing. As coalition forces advanced deeper into Afghanistan, intelligence reports suggested that bin Laden had fled east toward the rugged mountains near the Pakistani border. The region was unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. Towering peaks, deep caves, narrow mountain passes, few roads, and countless places to disappear. Then came one of the most significant battles of the early war. Tora Bora. Located in eastern Afghanistan, the mountainous area had long been rumored to contain caves and defensive positions used by al-Qaeda fighters. In December 2001, U.S. and allied Afghan forces launched an operation to surround the area. The belief inside Washington was simple. If bin Laden was anywhere, he was probably there. For days, coalition aircraft bombed suspected positions while Afghan fighters pushed through the mountains. Special operations teams coordinated strikes and gathered intelligence in difficult terrain. Reports from the battlefield suggested that senior al-Qaeda leaders were trapped. The world waited. Many believed the search was almost over. But then, silence. When the fighting ended, Osama bin Laden was gone. Exactly how he escaped remains the subject of historical debate. Some officials later argued he crossed into Pakistan through remote mountain routes. Others believed the opportunity to fully seal the area had been missed. Whatever happened, the result was undeniable. The world's most wanted man had escaped. Again. The news shocked intelligence officials. What many thought would be a campaign lasting weeks had suddenly become something entirely different. A global manhunt with no clear ending. Years passed. The war expanded. Thousands of intelligence officers reviewed millions of documents. Satellites watched remote regions. Drones monitored suspected compounds. Financial investigators traced money. Informants were recruited. Prisoners were questioned. Every small clue was examined. Every rumor was investigated. Yet, bin Laden remained invisible. To the public, it almost seemed impossible. How could one man avoid the combined resources of the CIA, FBI, NSA, military intelligence, and allied agencies for so many years? That question frustrated governments across the world. But behind closed doors, a handful of CIA analysts refused to give up. Instead of searching directly for Osama bin Laden, they made a bold decision. What if they searched for the people he trusted most? Because even the most secretive man in the world couldn't survive completely alone. And one trusted courier would eventually change everything. For nearly 10 years, Osama bin Laden had vanished. No phone calls. No internet. No public appearances. No confirmed photographs. It was as if he had disappeared from the face of the earth. But intelligence officers knew one thing. No one, not even the world's most wanted fugitive, could survive completely alone. Someone had to deliver messages. Someone had to bring food. Someone had to carry instructions. That realization changed the entire investigation. Instead of searching for bin Laden, the CIA began searching for the people closest to him. One name kept appearing in intelligence reports. A trusted courier. Unlike other members of al-Qaeda, this man avoided electronic communication. He rarely used phones. He traveled carefully. And he always seemed to disappear after every trip. For years, investigators followed fragments of information. A conversation here. A witness there. A vehicle seen in one city. Another report from somewhere else. None of the clues seemed important by themselves. But together, they slowly formed a pattern. Finally, in 2010, the courier led intelligence officers to an unusual compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. At first glance, nothing looked extraordinary. A high wall surrounded the property. Barbed wire covered sections of the perimeter. There were no telephone lines connected to the house. No internet service. The people living there burned their trash instead of putting it outside for collection. And despite the size of the compound, one resident never appeared in public. CIA analysts gave him a nickname. Satellite images showed a tall man walking alone inside the courtyard every day. Always inside the walls. Never outside. The agency couldn't see his face. They couldn't confirm his identity. But suspicion grew stronger with every passing week. For months, the compound was watched around the clock. Analysts studied daily routines, vehicle movements, visitors, building layouts, escape routes. Every detail mattered. Then came one of the most difficult decisions in modern intelligence history. President George W. Bush had authorized the invasion of Afghanistan years earlier. Now President Barack Obama faced a different choice. There was no absolute proof that Osama bin Laden was inside the compound. Only strong intelligence. Launching an operation inside Pakistan carried enormous diplomatic and military risks. If the information was wrong, the consequences could be severe. After weeks of meetings, intelligence briefings, and debate, the president approved the mission. On the night of May 1, 2011, U.S. time, 2 specially modified Black Hawk helicopters carrying members of the U.S. Navy's SEAL Team 6 crossed into Pakistani airspace. The mission depended on complete surprise. Everything had to happen quickly. As the helicopters approached the compound, something unexpected happened. One helicopter lost lift because of difficult air conditions inside the enclosed courtyard and made a hard landing. Despite the setback, the operation continued. The team adapted immediately. They secured the compound, moved from room to room, cleared each floor, and continued toward the upper levels. Less than 40 minutes after entering, the operation was over. Osama bin Laden had been killed. The team collected documents, digital storage devices, and other intelligence materials before leaving the compound. They destroyed the damaged helicopter to protect sensitive technology and departed before Pakistani security forces arrived. Hours later, President Barack Obama addressed the nation. He announced that the United States had carried out an operation in Abbottabad and that Osama bin Laden was dead. The news spread across the globe within minutes. Crowds gathered outside the White House. Others assembled in New York City near Ground Zero. For many Americans, the announcement marked the end of a chapter that had begun nearly a decade earlier. But history rarely ends with a single event. Bin Laden's death did not end terrorism. The war in Afghanistan continued for years. Al-Qaeda survived, though significantly weakened. Other extremist organizations later emerged in different parts of the world. The attacks of September 11 permanently changed airport security, intelligence cooperation, military strategy, and foreign policy. Governments invested billions of dollars in counterterrorism. Intelligence agencies expanded international partnerships. New surveillance technologies were developed. Security procedures became part of everyday life for millions of travelers. Historians continue to debate many of the decisions made before and after the 9th of November. Military strategies, foreign policy, intelligence failures, diplomatic consequences. Those discussions continue today. But one fact remains beyond dispute. The events surrounding Osama bin Laden reshaped the 21st century. His story is not one of admiration. It is a reminder of how ideology, conflict, and violence can alter the lives of millions of innocent people across the world. History teaches us that the cost of extremism is measured not only in politics or wars, but in human lives, families, communities, and generations that must live with the consequences. If this story teaches us anything, it is that understanding history is not about glorifying those responsible for violence. It is about learning how such events happened, so that future generations have a better chance of preventing them from happening again.